Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Library Research Week of 2023. The theme for this year's Library Research Week is Power Up Your Research Pathway, and the rest of Research Week will feature presentations under the following sub-themes. Today's is Switching On for the Research Pathway. Tomorrow, the sub-theme will be Connecting to the Research Pathway. Thursday will be Empowering through your research pathway, and Friday will be on Energizing Your Inner Power. Our third and last session for today is literature reviews from Kirchner van Deventer and Heila Maria, two of my colleagues. And this session will focus on learning about literature reviews to search, identify, select, and critically appraise literature. And our presenter, Kirchner, is the manager of the Carnegie Research Commons at Stellenbosch University Library, and he was previously a faculty librarian for education at Northwest University and came to Stellenbosch in 2019. Heila Maria is a faculty librarian at the Theology Library, and she describes herself as inquisitive and always optimistic to challenge new ideas for lifelong learning. Thank you, colleagues, and I'm handing over to you.
Great. Thank you very much for the introduction, Hanli. Can I just get an indication that everybody can hear me clearly?
We can hear you and we see your slides, Governor.
Great. All right.
And I see some thumbs up. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Hanli. Okay, so yes, I'm Kirchner van Deventer. And with me is Heila Maria. She's going to keep an eye on the chat for any questions. And if it's a pertinent question, she'll interrupt me and ask me to answer the question. But if it's not too urgent, we'll leave it till the end of the session for discussion there. So today session is about literature reviews. Now, one of the most common feedback that we get on these reviews is something that we can't really do anything about. And that is that certain faculties and departments, they've got their own approaches to how a literature review should be conducted. Now, those you will have to clarify with your own faculty and department on those specific technical elements. But what we are going to cover in this session specifically are applicable to every type of literature review that you will find. We'll go through the different steps of a literature review. I'll show you there. And yes, and I'll also show you where you can also find some examples of literature reviews from your faculty and your departments. Could I please just ask that if you are unmuted, just mute yourself as well? Right. So at the very start, this is quite a poignant quote, and ultimately it summarizes what a literature review is about. Your task is to build an argument, not a library. So it doesn't, you are not expected to find the entire body of knowledge of your subject area and to include that in your literature review, but only that which is most relevant to build your argument. So a definition that we just retrieved from Google, and it was actually quite a good one, so we decided to stick with it, is a literature review is a survey of scholarly sources, such as books, journal articles, and theses related to a specific topic or research question. It is often written as part of a thesis, dissertation, or research paper in order to situate your work in relation to existing knowledge. So two key things to take out here is, again, there's reference to the existing body of knowledge and your placement of your research within that body of knowledge. And that is also what a literature review does. And that is what the argument of your literature review ultimately aims to succeed at. So the 7 steps that we have identified or that we believe are best for any type of literature review to follow Obviously, the first step is to identify your research question. Most of you are probably past this point already, but it's always good to revert back to that. And if you are still a bit hazy about your research question and how to narrow it down, obviously this is a cyclical process. And as you proceed with reading the literature that you read, the more narrowed down your research question and sub-questions will ultimately become. Step two is where you will review the discipline styles. So this is where I made mention earlier that every faculty, every department, they've got their own preferences for how a literature review should be written or presented. And yes, that is where I will show you where you can get additional information on that. But unfortunately, it's simply not within the scope of my expertise or this session to cover all the different examples. Now, step three, searching the literature. This is where you need to make sure that you know who your faculty librarian is and that you become best friends with them as quickly as possible. And then step four, managing your literature. We'll go in a bit more detail. That's just basically how to organize it, how to store it, what kind of tools are available to help you with doing that. And critically analyzing and evaluating the literature, there we will introduce the literature synthesis table, a way that you can break down existing literature or the key elements of your literature search results. And in that way, you can filter through and ultimately determine what is relevant and what is not relevant to your review. And that synthesize is where you finally combine all the results that you found, everything, and basically prepare to start writing the review, which is the final step, step 7. Okay, so now step 1, I am not going to spend too long on, since I do assume that this is something that most of you would have already covered. But yes, obviously you need to identify your topic and you need to refine that topic by searching on databases and just read and find background information to see what has already been written on the topic and what are the gaps and issues regarding the topic. In cases in such a basic preliminary search for information, this is where Wikipedia can come in handy because Wikipedia does serve as a good summary of what is known about a particular topic. And at the bottom of every Wikipedia article, you'll find a list of references, and those references are, will more than likely be legitimate, valid sources that you can actually then consult once you delve deeper. And then narrowing down. You should by now know what your topic is about to start developing your research question. But you can also ask yourself these 6 journalistic questions, and they can help you narrow your question words, excuse me, and they can help you narrow your focus from a broad topic to a specific question. First one, who? Who are you interested in? A specific group of people, or is it a particular demographic, gender, sex, age, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, or something else? Um, are there any key figures related to the topic? If um, available statistics that are available, and so on. What are the issues surrounding your topic? Um, are there any subtopics that are currently up for contention? Any disagreements? And in looking at the background information, are there any gaps or questions that seemed unanswered to you? In that area, that gray area where no matter how hard you search, you can't really find that information that kind of piqued your interest. That it is usually does imply that there is a gap in the research. And in that gap is where you could place your own research and in that way build on the body of knowledge. Where is another question to ask, and can your topic be narrowed down to a geographic location? And yes, be careful not to get too narrow, because the narrower you focus your research on a particular area, the less information there will be available that you can use for your research. For example, if you use a tiny, tiny town that has a very little historical context, well, does have historical context, but um, there's not much else written about the town outside of one or two articles, you won't have much to work from. Whereas a city like Cape Town, there will be a lot of information and a much larger sample from which you can draw for your data collection eventually as well. And when is your topic current or historical? Is it confined to a specific time period? And was there a causative event that led your topic to become an area of study? So this obviously also impacts on the type of material you are going to be looking for. So if you are looking at the latest developments in artificial intelligence, a book from the 1950s might not be relevant. I am aware that there are books, some seminal works from the previous century, even in computer science, that are still relevant to this day. But the bulk of your research material will likely come from journal articles that were published in the past couple of years. Whereas if you're an historian, the focus of your work will often be material that was published ages ago, or decades ago, or hundreds of years ago. Um, and then, yeah, the causative event. I mean, we just got out of COVID, and the amount of research that has arisen since then on all fields of research is a good example of how a topic can become an area of study from a recent causative event. Another one currently that we all are dealing with is load shedding. I'm curious to know what kind of research will come out of South Africa in a couple of years. And I'm holding thumbs that some of that will offer us a better solution than coal-fired power stations. Anyway, sorry about that, personal opinion. Right, going on. So the next step is that you need to search for examples in your discipline. And the best place to find that, and this is a good place to even start your literature review, is to go and look for theses and dissertations based on your topic. So just quickly jumping away from the PowerPoint, I am just going to the library homepage to show you where we can find information. Okay, so under Find, you click on Find. Then now I need to see where it is these days. Ah, here we go. Our new uh, modular look on our website is new to me as well, so I'm still getting used to where everything is now. Okay, so yes, under SU Research Output, you will find ETCs here. So we can just click there. And here you'll see you'll have a breakdown of the different faculties and the different types of materials that's been published there. You can even do a search. Uh, let's see I'm thinking what kind of topic I could be looking for. Uh, let's say sustainable development. And I mean, obviously, there's going to be many, many results for that. And then we need to select the type, and we need to make sure that we select thesis. So you need to jump to where thesis appears. There we go. And here we have some examples. This isn't actually, it's actually reset my search now. Excuse me for that. Let's try and do it again. All right, so I'm going to use this first result that's going to pop up. And yes, it's a 1999 one, but again, depending on faculty and so on, there might very well not be that many changes in how it's been applied since then. And let's follow that link, and hopefully that will actually take us to the article. Does not seem like it. The technological demons are bothering me today. Ah, here we go. Here's a better one. Okay, so it's a 2004 Science and Technology Policies and Structures in Southern Africa. And yes, if you click on there, you will get the PDF. It will download it. And then the best place to go and make sure where the literature review appears would be in the table of contents. So you'll usually it would be the second chapter in some fields, but there are other fields where it does vary. And again, and this is why I can't give you an exact example of how it would be done in your faculty or in your field of specialization. But yes, that is my recommendation. Go and search on our ETD database, our Sun Scholar, and find uh, articles that or theses and dissertations that are relevant to your field and that will assist you. The other great resource that you can consult for further information on how a literature review should be structured in your area is to go to the library guides that we are available on the library homepage. And if you're not aware of what they are, we have a library guide for every subject that's on offer at Stellenbosch University. So you can go just through the A to Z list and until you get to your subject area. So taking a random one, plant pathology, you'll click here, you'll see immediately you'll see who your faculty librarian is. As I said earlier, it's very important to become very good friends with your faculty librarian because they can assist you not only in finding examples of a literature review uh, in your field, but they will also help you develop your search string. And we're going to get to that in the next section. And how to narrow down your search so you get only the most relevant results for your literature review. But other things to take in note of on the guide, you'll see there's searching tips, there's books, finding articles, a lot of additional support channels here that you can definitely will assist you in your research process. All righty. So here is just in the PowerPoint, just the steps again, get to know your librarian, as I said, but I am going to skip over those for now and here talk about the search strategies that I just mentioned. So a search strategy is a string of keywords uh, that basically is a breakdown of your research topic that you can enter in any of the databases, academic databases that we have available, and you will get accurate results based on that search. All right. So, and some of these databases has a search help option as well, where they will give you some useful tips. But again, your librarian is expert at using these search functions and how to create a proper search string. So here is the steps on doing it. First, you identify the keywords, you construct the search strategy, identify the relevant databases. Again, those databases you can identify on, oh, has already been almost pre-identified for you on your LibGuide, and you'll find that information under the articles section in the library guide. There will usually be a list of recommended databases for your field, your subject field. And then you perform your search. So here's an example of a search strategy that we created for this webinar. So if the topic is the effect of social media on political behavior in a democratic society, then all the words in gray are essentially irrelevant to the search. And most search platforms actually do exclude those words from the search. But sometimes, especially uh, a, a search platform like Google, they do not necessarily exclude that. And that is why you do get millions upon millions of results from Google for even sometimes a specific search. So basically, the keywords that we are looking for here is social media, political behavior, and democratic or democracy. And yes, so you will also notice that and is written in capital letters. And that is because on some databases, and is considered, it's a Boolean operator. So it combines two search terms. And some databases require you to write it in capital letters so that it recognizes it as functioning as that specific feature. And then at the bottom here is now an example of a search string. So we've got social media or internet or Twitter or Facebook or Instagram, all in soft brackets. So first it's going to look for any of those results. And then in soft brackets, we've got civic attitudes in quotation marks, or civil values, or value with a truncated asterisk at the end, or attitude, or political behavior. The quotation marks looks for a specific phrase. So it is going to look for that exact phrase. It's not going to look for civic and attitudes as two separate concepts. Rather, it is now, because it's in quotation marks, it's going to look for civic attitudes as a primary concept. And the asterisk truncator here at the over here is basically used as a feature where you can search for one word that has that can possibly end in various different ways. So values is fairly straightforward. I mean, it's value or values with an S. But if you were to only put in value, some databases might exclude values from the search, if that does make sense. But for a more formal training on how to use and how to apply these search strategies, make an appointment with your faculty librarian and they will give you some in-depth training on how to apply it. Okay. So next step then would be managing the literature that you now found in your search. So and the steps that we can look at here is you can collect and you search the literature, and you can use the inclusion-exclusion table to help in managing the literature. Another name for the inclusion-exclusion table is a literature synthesis table, and I'll demonstrate that now. Then reference managers here at Stellenbosch, we are using or supporting Mendeley. But in future, we are also now going to be supporting Zotero and offering assistance to anyone who would prefer to use Zotero as well. And then skim reading in order to save on time so that you don't read every single source that you found, only to discover at the end that you read through an entire article and only to find that it isn't really relevant to your research. So yes, this inclusion-exclusion table, also known as the literature synthesis table, is useful for breaking down literature into manageable and organizable chunks or segments. Now, here's an example. This article is one that I've found by using the search string that I've demonstrated earlier. And the breakdown of this inclusion-exclusion table um, uh, is, yeah, so you've got your authors or authors, you've got the year and the title in the first column, then the purpose of the study, the method or the experiment, um, the sample or the design, and the findings. And most of this information that I copied and pasted from the article into here, I actually found in the abstract. And it's usually in the abstract where you find most of this pertinent information. And this will, at a later point, you'll be able to elaborate a bit more on the table and include additional information once you have determined it is worth reading more than just the abstract or have done a skim read of it. So the reference management tools, yes, citation management software these days were initially there to just make referencing easier and to generate a bibliography for you at the end of your document. But these days, they actually work excellently as a storage place where you can store all your research material. Mendeley and Zotero and most reference managers actually allow you to attach a PDF to a particular resource. So if you have an article referenced and you have the attached PDF, you can even make annotations and footnotes and things in there. You can organize it according to folders, and you can even share and collaborate with other colleagues by having a shared library that you can work from. So to skim read, basically is just glancing through the most important parts of an article or a book chapter. So with a journal, it would be the title, the author, the journal, the date, reading through the abstract. That will be the best place also for you to first determine, is this really, really relevant, or did the title just sound as if it's relevant? If it's a book, table of contents, obviously is a good way to determine which sections of the book will be relevant and which sections won't. The introduction and conclusion of a journal article or of a book chapter or of just a normal book. And then the first sentence of each paragraph, the leading sentence of each paragraph is usually a good indicator of the flow of a piece of research material. Right. So your typical journal article structure will be structured as displayed here. The abstract, again, a brief summary of the article. It would include the research question, the methodology, and also the results. The introduction will give background of the topic and then leads up to the aim of the study. And a brief literature review may be included. There are also review articles out there or that sometimes they even did a literature review and the article is based on that literature review. The methods will describe the procedures and how the study was set up and data was collected. Results and the findings, often the most poignant or most pertinent parts of a study. It's a presentation of the data from the study, charts, tables, visualizations. The discussion is the analysis of the data and how the study relates to the existing topic. The conclusion usually includes recommendations for further study, but also what the study contributes to the existing body of knowledge. And to an extent, this is what every or a literature reviews chapter will almost include to some extent. You will have an introductory paragraph or section. Um, the methods will outline the topic that you were looking for, and the procedure that you undertook in finding the relevant information, especially with systematic reviews becoming more and more of a thing these days. That aspect of how you gathered the information becomes as important as the information itself. Um, sorry, Maya, just ask that you mute yourself. To see here. Thank you. Okay, but yes, and then continuing, the discussion will be where you will highlight all the different, or at least all the most important aspects of the research topic that you are analyzing. Those that agree with each other, those that don't, or those that do disagree with each other. Otherwise, uh, the latest topics for discussion in the field and all those things. And then in the conclusion is where you will tie in the literature that you have found and that you have compiled and you have written about in the discussion to your own research, to your own topic, and how it supports your topic and how your topic builds upon what has been written previously. And the reference list in any journalist and any book is always a great source of finding additional reading material that might be useful for your literature review. So critically analyzing and evaluating the literature, you can organize your sources according to themes, which will aid in developing your argument. And here, the golden thread is an important thing, a concept to keep in mind. So any piece of writing will must always have what you can imagine as a golden thread flowing through that writing. It is what keeps the argument in line, you could almost say. So, and this is why in academic writing, you will often find that there is constant reference being made back to the research questions, the research topic, the sub questions, to essentially to the thesis of your study. And that is one example of how this golden thread can be maintained throughout the research, is as you write, constantly tie it back to your own research, to your own plans of what you are planning, or to your own planned project of what you plan on doing. All right. But it's also important to evaluate the quality of the literature that you are reviewing. Because as we all know, there are predatory publishers out there. There are sometimes articles and other materials that become redacted, or not redacted, but retracted, because they either for whatever ethical reasons there might be, or there was an error in the data collection, or any other reason like that. So, but it can also, by evaluating it, it will also give you an idea of whether it is more relevant or less relevant to your topic or not. So yes, the first point you must look at is the purpose of the article. Why was it written? If it was written and it has the purpose has no relevance to your own research, then you must question whether this article would be relevant, even if the title might have hinted at that initially. But yes, is it to persuade the reader to do something? Is it an informative piece, or is it to prove something? Yes, like a study that was conducted and the evidence is now presented. Then the type of audience that it is aimed at and the type of material. Is it a scholarly source, and for what type of reader is the author writing? Here, again, one can question, is Wikipedia. Technically, you could argue it is a scholarly source because the information there does actually get vetted before it gets published. The only problem is that editing that information is way too easy, and something can get uploaded today, and within 2 minutes, somebody could have already changed all the information that was uploaded. So that's why you need to make sure about the type of material and who it is aimed for. Academic journals are aimed at academic audiences, and that is why those types of material will be more relevant than a website, for instance. Then looking at the organization and content, this is a good indication of the amount of effort that gets put into a research paper will ultimately also give you perhaps a gut feeling of how much effort might have been put into the actual research. So is the material, is it organized and focused? Is the argument and the presentation, is it understandable to a person at least on that academic level? Is it original research? Is it a review of previous research, or just an informative piece? Other questions you can ask, is there possibly any bias that could come to the fore? Does the author perhaps have a history of bias? It would be tiring to have to look up every single source that you find to go and make sure, is this researcher reliable or legit? And in that sense, this would probably be something that you can reserve for a time where you are actually reading something and you feel, or you get the feeling again, that maybe something that this author is trying to push an agenda. Sometimes that does come through. Sometimes the objectivity or subjectivity of a researcher does come through in their published material. And if you pick up on that, go and read up on the author and then decide if they are really worth including in your own research. Again, recency, we have touched on that. Is it an up-to-date book? Books, for instance, are published. Some books these years get a new edition every 2 years, some every year. Or is it an out-of-date material? Is there any relevance? Like a book on the printing press for computational science, or at least the latest trends in computational science. Just a random example. I know that in some way it could possibly be tied. Or is it timeless? Plato's of Plato and Aristotle's philosophical works might be considered to be timeless pieces of work, since they still hold relevance up to this day. Then authority, and specifically referring to the author. Is the author an expert in their field, or are they an upcoming researcher, maybe just a master's student who now published an article out of their master's thesis? Where is that author employed? Have they won any awards? Here, ORCID, you will should all be familiar with ORCID, the identifier system, is a great resource where you can go and check up on the published author, or the authors. Usually, many articles these days actually do include the ORCID ID of the author or authors, and then you can go and have a look at the author. Go and check. what is their research history? What else have they published? Obviously, that is something you can again go and look at um, uh, for additional reading material. But yes, that's a good way of at least establishing the authority underlying the article or the academic source. And then, is the article relevant to your current research project? And does it cover the topic comprehensively, partially, or is it just an overview? And there again is probably where one of the greater risks can lie in when conducting a literature review, especially if you have trouble finding enough relevant material, is you might find a journal article where there's one sentence that basically supports what you want to say in line with the body of knowledge. But the rest of the article isn't really relevant. It's either focused completely on a different topic, or the sampling is going to be completely different, or whatever, for whatever reason that might be. But you are tempted to use that as a supporting source because of that one sentence that will sound good in your paper. Avoid doing that, and rather focus then on those sources that are most relevant to your topic. Okay, before going on, I'm just going to pause quickly and check if there are any questions. So let me just have a look at the chat. Yeah, I see. Very difficult to find a gap. Any advice on how to identify, especially if the topic you want to do is widely covered? Yeah, I think in a case like that, it is often the best approach in a case like that would be to speak with your supervisor. Um, yeah, if even with your faculty librarian, you still can't find a gap in the research that's really because it's so widely covered, then yeah, I would recommend speaking to your supervisor. They would have enough of an existing knowledge of the body of work that they can refer you to, or at least some material, that give you some direction uh, of where you would be able to find a gap. And yes, thank you, Hanley. I see you answered there as well. And I'm sure that will definitely prove useful as well. Okay.
I think all the questions have been already addressed in the chat, Kirchner. It was
Thank
just
you, Hanley.
also sort of just comments.
Okay. I see there's just a question on what was step 3. I should probably know that out of my mind or out of memory, but this is a bit of a crazy week for me. Yeah, step 3 is searching the literature. So just jumping back to the mind maps. Again, would you be penalized if you only use one source due to the fact it covers your whole topic? Sure. It's for, I have to say, from experience, I do not know of a master's or PhD study that's based on only one source. So that sounds like quite a very specific topic. Um, and I think, again, there your supervisor will probably be best at to advise you on that. But
Kirchner,
yes,
can I just come in because the question from Gail is from one of my students. Gail, you will need to access multiple sources to get all the views and everything to be able to make a informed decision as where you stand. So one source normally wouldn't do it.
no, thank you, Ahela. And yes, also remember that a PG postgraduate diploma is on the same level as our honors, and a lot of people say honors is sometimes the most intense year of study that you have to do. I see. Will this slide deck be made available? Yes, we will share. We will share the slides and the recording afterwards. Okay, right. Let's continue. So, mind mapping central ideas is another way of at least structuring, planning ahead for how you are going to structure your literature review. It allows you to map out key themes and ideas in order to structure your research. And there's quite a variety of open source tools available. CMAP is an example of one that you can download. Excuse me. But on our library homepage, or our research process library guide, we also have a useful tools section. And there we also have a couple of other websites where you can do mind mapping. But if you just Google mind mapping, you will find many free tools that can help. So again, taking the article that we used earlier, I just broke it down a little bit just for demonstrative purposes here. But basically how you could plan a mind map would be social media and political participation. It's in the USA, the survey methodology, age and gender. And then even in preparation, you can attach additional sources and say, okay, there's also an article that's covered South Africa. They used a different survey methodology, and the age and gender was different as well. But yes, most important, especially before you start writing, and obviously the next step is writing the literature, is that step of evaluating the literature. So it's a continuation of the evaluation you've already done on the, let's say, the validity or the reliability of the literature. Now you have to evaluate it also according to how relevant it is to your research or not. Because, as I said, one sentence in a journal to support might be too little. But if there's a paragraph that's worthwhile, then obviously it's still worth including in your inclusion-exclusion table. So, yes, with the inclusion-exclusion table, you can easily get an overview of the literature for your review. And by synthesizing the information, you can determine which of the literature will be relevant for your review and which will not. And the synthesizing is basically just a compare and contrast, checking which of these article or which of the literature supports this point of view. Let's say point of view A, which literature supports point of view B, and are there any that perhaps are suggesting a point of view C, things like that. So then, based on the literature you have gathered and evaluated, you should at the least be able to interpret the current understanding of your topic, and you should be able to relay that understanding in your literature review. And you must be able to determine how the literature impacts your research questions, because that ultimately is what your the literature review is about. Again, placing your research within the existing body of knowledge. So in this sense, if the literature review alone answers your research questions, then that means the research you hope to conduct has already been done. if your research questions point to either a flaw in the existing research or the gap, the gap that we all sometimes struggle to find, then yes, that's then at least the literature review supports your argument that this is research that's worth taking forward. And yes, the literature should, in some shape or form, answer your research question and impact your knowledge and understanding of the subject. But it shouldn't answer it completely, if that makes sense. And even literature that contradicts your research question and provisional answer should be included, because you will have to obviously um, counter that argument that might invalidate the research you plan on conducting. Okay, now in writing the review, and I think that this is where a lot of people, and I think this is where the request for real examples come from, um, is it's basically based on the fear of, I think, the fear of writing. I think many researchers are used to doing data gathering and writing reports and so on. But a literature review can, to some extent, also reflect your own opinion, your own voice. And that is why many people are daunted by this aspect of the research process. So if in these steps, it's worth keeping these fairly elemental tips in mind. Um, Always write to understand. If you have to write in a way that reflects your own understanding of the literature, that's the best way for your supervisor or for anybody who's going to read your literature to know that you know what you are talking about, as it will reflect your knowledge of the subject matter, but also write to be understood. So this is one of the best tips that I ever received from a professor. And he always advised that you must imagine that there's a person or standing just behind you, reading what you are writing. And will this person, a fairly well-educated person, not necessarily in your field, but that somebody who would at least be able to understand what you are trying to communicate. Will this person understand what you are writing? So when you are rereading what you have written, always consider how another person might understand it, might understand what you have written. So yes, imagine somebody standing behind you and reading what you write. And will they understand what you are trying to ultimately communicate? And write early and write often. Start writing just to get ideas on paper. Practice makes perfect. Uh, Academic writing is a skill. If you haven't been in academia for a couple of years and you're now coming back with a master's or a, a new study, then yes, you need to basically get that skill going again. And here, the writing lab is a great resource for our postgraduate students and even our undergraduates. Because if you consult with them at an early enough stage, they will walk the entire process with you and they will guide you on writing principles, writing styles, uh, and getting things right from the start. But yeah, you can't contact the writing lab a week before you need to submit and ask them to check if everything is correct. That won't work, unfortunately. And also, don't get it right, just get it written. So think of drafting. Don't worry too much at the very start about getting all the stylistic elements correct, or whether you've got the correct font or whatever. Just get it right, get it written. The more drafts you ultimately will have, the best quality will ultimately come from the final draft. So,
Sorry, Kirchner,
Ayla?
we have a question. Can a systemic review or scoping review replace a literature review in a PhD study?
Hmm. I honestly don't know. I cannot see why not. I think it's actually being done in quite a couple of cases because essentially a systematic review is an incredibly comprehensive literature review. That's what it boils down to. Is you start off with a massive amount of data of every single article that seems to be relevant to your field. It can sometimes be up to 5,000 articles or research sources that you found. And then you have to narrow it down to only those that are most relevant. But yes, in that, the process of how you collected that information and how you made that narrowing down decision is just as important. Um, we've got a scoping review webinar tomorrow. So I would definitely, if you're not registered for it yet, Ms. Aguriwu, please do so. And yes, maybe you'll be able, the presenter tomorrow will be able to better answer your question.
Hi, only here. Maybe if I can also just add, I totally agree with you. But I think the best advice would also be to just clarify that with your supervisor. What kind of review would be the most applicable and the best for your specific research as well. But yes, indeed, systematic reviews or scoping reviews replace in sometimes your literature review, but do clarify that with your supervisor.
Yes, and our other colleague, Jeremiah Peterson, also makes a very important point that it does require the application of an entire research method. So yeah, thank you, Heine. I think the best advice in a case like that, again, is to check with your supervisor. In most cases, your supervisor is ultimately the best one to guide you, even in your literature review. But yes, we can still try and give you some tips from our side as well. All right. So again, going back to the writing of the review, the golden thread or the line of arguments that I explained earlier, it's a really essential element of a literature review, or well, of any writing actually, because it just it increases the readability of your text and the flow of your argument. Signposting or titles, headings, and subheadings, very important to structure your writing in such a way that it also increases the flow, makes it easier to refer back to a particular section, and in that way, again, strengthening the golden thread. And authority, write with authority. You have to reflect your knowledge of existing literature. Is it apparent, and it must be apparent in your bibliography. If you are doing a research paper and you somehow manage to omit one of the most seminal texts in your area, that is something that could count against you once your thesis is up for moderation, unless you've got a very valid reason to exclude it. But yes, you have the voice at this point of your research career where you have to write a literature review that you can actually write from a point of authority. You already have at least 1 or 2 degrees behind you. Now, some things to avoid. Long quotations. It's a tricky one because we always feel that, I mean, this person said it so well, so what's the point in paraphrasing? I won't be able to communicate it even better. But the reason why even you still need to paraphrase rather than use a long quotation is that if you paraphrase it and you paraphrase it well, it shows that you engaged with the piece of writing, that you understand that what is being said there, and you understand it well enough that you can put it in your own words and make it understandable to others. And by paraphrasing it, it makes it easier to relate the information from the source back to your own argument. And once you've basically got your first couple of drafts done and you're ready to write it up, be neat and tidy in your presentation. Poor formatting and referencing does negatively impact research papers all the time. And yes, so it is definitely advisable. Again, consult with the writing lab, consult with us here at the Research Commons for referencing at least, and even for formatting your thesis, we can provide you guidance and even training on that. And secondary sources, it's sometimes impossible to avoid, but it's again, wherever it is possible to try to go back to the original work and avoid using secondary sources, because one person's interpretation of an original source that you are now reading might actually not be as accurate as the original work. So at the very base, or at the very least, go and find try and find a review article or something of the source where you got the secondary source from. That's a bit of a long lead to maybe follow, but it could be worth it sometimes. So yes, in this final section, but we are just going to give an overview of how to structure the content of a literature review or of any writing in general. So we'll be looking at the introduction and what to include, the body, what should be included there, how a paragraph should be structured, and the funnel approach as well. And then in conclusion, we'll be looking at the conclusion. So the introduction explains the focus. This is where you're going to include your thesis statement, where you're going to include your research questions and your sub-questions. And in that way, obviously, you're going to establish the importance of the subject. And you'll do that by giving a brief summary of what kind of work has been done on the topic. So you'll identify the top controversies within the field and any other research, recent research, which has raised questions about earlier assumptions about the field. And these will be summative. They will, you'll be expanding on them more in the body. So here the introduction should almost be written after you have written the body to some extent. And yes, further background or history is given. And then, yes, as I said, a purpose or thesis statement is included as well. Now, the body, as mentioned, this is where you'll be making use of those headings and subheadings to organize the content and to structure your writing. Here, you're going to be presenting summaries summaries of the research material that you have decided to include in your literature review. You'll be saying that authors A, B, and C all agree about it from this point of view, but authors D, E, and F disagree, and they counter with a different, completely different point of view. And yeah, here you'll highlight the major themes or topics, and you'll underwrite them by highlighting the key contributors to those themes and the topics. Further emphasize the most important trends in the research or in your field and where it is going, because this could also lead to where you are ultimately heading with your research project. And yeah, as I've emphasized earlier, any findings about which researchers agree or disagree on, simply to be as comprehensive as possible. So, but you still have to write paragraphs. Well, sorry, that's stupidly stated. In our writing structure, obviously, there's many paragraphs that get used. And even a paragraph structure is important to consider when writing. So we referred earlier to the topic sentence, or the first sentence that you can use in skim reading to get an idea of what the rest of the paragraph is going to be about. And yes, that's what the topic sentence is, what usually is the first sentence. It presents the focus of the paragraph and it foregrounds the content of the entire paragraph and what's going to be covered. And it increases the text readability in the sense that you know what is to follow. Then following the topic sentence, you're going to have your supporting sentences and further development. So you'll have your argument that explains or proves the topic sentence. The evidence will be provided. The evidence is the literature review. Here you are going to say again, my topic sentence is proven by the arguments provided by these authors and their research works. And once you've given that evidence, you elaborate further on why their evidence explains or proves the topic. And then a concluding or a transitional sentence, it usually sums up the argument of the paragraph that's taken place, or it might link to the next paragraph, but it always usually is a combination of the two to a lesser or a greater degree. And usually what you will have is a seamless transition. Again, the golden thread. Again, the readability of your literature review to make it at least, at the very least, interesting to read. So now with the funnel approach, this is in one way, the funnel approach can be tied to how you're going to write up your literature review, but also how you're going to structure your entire literature review chapter, or even you can even structure a paragraph according to it as well. But yeah, it's just some guidelines. So the idea of the funnel approach is you start with the broad strokes. So the two main topics that we're covering in an example is social media and politics. But we'll probably find the most information on social media. So you'll start with your literature review on an overview of social media developments over the past 20 years and maybe some big events that were that social media had an impact on, whether it was political, but maybe economic or religious or any kind of impact that would have had. And then you go to the next step, and it's social media and politics. And this is where you're now going to get a bit more specific. What events are there where social media and politics played around? And then we can look at the Arab Spring events. How did Donald Trump's Twitter activities impact the votes that he received or did not receive? And yeah, going there even more. Effect of social media on political participation. And now here you get to the literature that's very, very specific to that field. And now you'll look at, okay, maybe Facebook is one of the older platforms. So there's some literature saying that Facebook generally has an older audience. So the more conservative political parties will likely be using Facebook, and that's why they will focus on that. But the more liberal political parties that usually has a younger voter base, they might they might be on TikTok, so the focus would go in that direction. And you will be looking for literature that supports those kind of arguments. These are the ones that just came from the top of my head. But those are the type of things that this type of study would be looking at. And that's where it would narrow down to your topic. So here we have got the broad strokes one. We've already found one article on how it looks in the USA, but your topic might focus on how social media is used in South Africa, how Helen Ziller uses Twitter, for example. And then that you've got the, but ultimately you'll have your question, does social media type matter to politics? And if that is the question you're trying to answer, you'll be able to do, you'll ultimately be able to do so just based on having narrowed down and gotten all the relevant information. Right. And the conclusion, will summarize all the evidence. It will again compare and contrast the evidence, the different findings. It will emphasize the significance of the evidence. You will highlight the gaps here again and allow you to indicate how previous research leads to your own research project. Okay, and that's basically it. And we've still got about 20 minutes left for questions and answers. But yeah, where to from here? For additional information, again, consult your faculty librarian or your library guide. Con contact the writing lab. I can really recommend that you contact them. You can just Google Stellenbosch University Writing Lab. And thesis formatting assistance. The postgraduate office runs a couple of workshops, worthwhile workshops, but you can also contact us in the Research Commons for hands-on assistance. And that's it from my side. So if there's any questions, you're welcome. Why restate why a conclusion is needed for a literature review? If I understand correctly, yeah, so just remember that there's a concluding sentence in a paragraph, but there's also the concluding section of every chapter. And then there's even a concluding chapter at the end. So so the conclusions will ultimately build the one upon the other. The more information, the more evidence you gather, you will be doing. You will be writing up in the conclusion. There is unfortunately not a template available for a literature review or a thesis structure. This is why we recommend that you do go and have a look at theses and dissertations that's been written in your field. Yes, we will share the slides and recordings.
Kirchner?
There was
Hanley, you can go first.
there was a request from Tandeka that you please go back to the last slide before this one, but I'm unfortunately not sure which slide, Tandeka. Maybe if you can unmute yourself and just ask Kirchner.
I'm thinking it might be this one. The conclusion one.
Tandeka, you're welcome to make use of the chat as well if you don't have sound or
She
something.
says thank you. Yeah, no, she did indicate the conclusion.
Okay, all right.
So the presentation will be shared via email. The recording will be uploaded either later today or early tomorrow morning to our YouTube channel.
Kirchner, there's just a question from Ms. Namuganga. So in case both the primary and secondary sources have the same interpretation, would it be fine to cite the secondary source then? I think it will depend on your discipline or your supervisor. What do you say, Kirchner? Hanley even?
Yeah, I would say again, there's not a. It's generally advised against simply because it is always best just to read what's been written in the original author's words. Um, at most, you gain an additional source that you can use in your literature review. But sometimes there is a type of synchronicity between what's been written by the new author and it's based on what they cited. So there is a space for using secondary sources, but it cannot be overly done. And it's, yeah, there must be some kind of rationale for why you would include it.
There's just another one from Lowry Lowe. Will you comment on similar studies conducted using a similar framework in LitReview or on the methodology, for instance, social realism?
Um, Ms. Lowe, could you maybe unmute yourself and explain maybe explain what you are asking?
So I just want to ask you, for instance, let's say my research is now on an academic institute, let's say internationalization in Stellenbosch, but now I would like to say that this framework has been applied to similar academic programs, using now like social realism. Would I make that comment in the lit review, or would I rather reserve that for my methodology?
Um, well, to some extent, the literature review will also foreshadow your methodology. So I would actually include social realism, at least in the literature review, in the sense that you do have to give background for that as well, especially if it's going to play a big part in your research methodology or your research approach. I hope that answers the question.
Okay, I don't see any new questions or any hands. Thank you very much. Sorry, there's one last one. Let me just quickly take a look. Evaluating the literature slide. Stephanie, can you see the chat from Peter?
Yes, I am reading through that now. Yeah, I agree that that is definitely something to. We obviously need to guard against our own bias as well, and that does run a risk. And I think asking a question about where the author was employed is not necessarily the best way to phrase what we're trying to um, uh, relay there. But yeah, if I suppose, Hayla, how about what do you say?
Is that the, sorry, I didn't hear now.
The question is, yeah, the question about whether we should consider where an author is employed or has been employed, if that might not lead to our own bias.
Yes, it could be. Um, if in your research it's something that's going to trouble you, but objectively you will need to include that voice there because it exists, even though you don't agree with it. You have to, then you can name the person and what he said, and then make the statement you don't agree for the following reasons. Um, just to have all the voices out there.
And also to slot in with Heila's opinion there is what we usually mean also by where is the author employed. If, say for an example, the research is published to enhance a specific company and the author is from that company as well, then you sort of have to question the bias from the author side. And what we also usually mean is to just check, is this person from an example from an academic, authoritative, reliable institution? And you don't really compare the universities or institutions with each other, but just take in consideration the content in regarding with where is this author from? If that can also help to clarify.
Yeah, thanks, colleagues. And then yes, I mean, ultimately every university has got their fields or their specializations or areas where they excel. And I mean, if an article it doesn't have to be a prestigious university, it might just be a prestigious faculty that is doing groundbreaking work in the area of research. Obviously, then work published or from that area would ultimately carry more weights than from a university that doesn't have that specialization.
Colleagues, there is a guest, Judith, that has a hand up. She needs, Judith, you can go ahead and ask your question.
Thank you so much. Maybe I would like to hear more about the theoretical framework and conceptual framework in the literature review.
Could you elaborate a bit on that?
Come up again.
Could you elaborate a bit on that?
I have seen many faculties asking for theoretical frameworks and conceptual frameworks in the literature review. So I was wondering if this is different.
Again, it would vary from faculty to faculty and how you would approach it. And it depends also on what type of discipline you are in. So a theoretical, depending on a theoretical approach, you will have to underpin the research methodology, the design, and the theoretical basis upon which you are going to build your research. But yeah, in this area, I am unfortunately not I would not consider myself skilled enough to give you a conclusive answer. I would rather consult with your supervisor on how to apply it specifically in your faculty.
Thank you.
Okay, I think this is it. Just to once again confirm what Kirchner started off with, please consult with your supervisor, and this is sort of a guideline that we can give you on how to tackle your literature review, but it will definitely depend on your topic, how it will be tweaked and the type of research that you do. So please remember that your supervisor is your assistant in your research journey and always consult them. Kirchner and Heila, thank you very much. And I just want to confirm there was a lot of questions regarding whether this recording will be available. Yes, indeed. And I've shared the link a few times in the chat as well. All the webinars will be available on the library's YouTube channel, and we will share the slides and everything. Please consider joining us for the rest of our week. And we have some wonderful and quite relevant topics regarding your research as well coming up for the rest of the week. And thank you for all for attending and your participation and engagement. And we really appreciate your support to the library. Thank you all and bye.
Thanks,
Thank
honey.
you.
Goodbye, everybody.
Thank you, Professor.